I have the best job. I love my job. Because every day I get to listen to stories from all over the region. I'm going to specifically talk about Colorado today, given the audience, but really it's the Rocky Mountain West. I get to immerse myself in the tapestry of narratives that are emerging from all of our member stations. I'm not a cartographer, so anyone looking closely at this, bear with me. But you can see how far our reach is with Rocky Mountain Community Radio. Through the incredible reporting being done at a local level, the storytelling that is happening, the amplification of the stories coming from our communities, I get so excited by that. And as much as our stories reflect the diversity in our communities, it's also striking to me how we have so many shared threads running throughout all of these stories and throughout all of our communities. There's incredible connectivity in the challenges and also the solutions that are emerging, whether it is the increasing impacts of the climate crisis, wildfires, floods, diminishing water resources, soaring cost of housing, and much more. But with all of these stories to tell, how do we actually support our newsrooms in telling them? And how do I get? Collaboration is the key. We have incredible content being produced, but how do we get it in front of an even broader audience, and particularly as that audience is increasingly in digital spaces? Well, we are, and we always will be, radio stations. That is who we are. And we'll be newspapers as well, for those of you in newspapers, but we know that we also need to be in that digital realm. It's not either or, it really is both. And collaboration works. It's true across all platforms, including digital. And it is possible to collaborate, to share resources and content, while still maintaining the unique identity of your own outlet, of your own platform, and your own community. RIMCOR, Rocky Mountain Community Radio, is a perfect example of that. Small newsrooms in community radio stations across Colorado and the Rocky Mountain West are creating these incredible stories. They're sharing their stories then throughout the network. They can localize these stories coming from other stations and make those stories relevant to their audience. In turn, they then have access to stories from communities throughout the region. So, a report from Telluride gets broadcast on KGNU, and the Front Range audience gets to hear what's happening on the Mountain West. A report from Aspen Public Radio is then broadcast at KSJD in the Four Corners in Colorado, in Cortez, KZMU in Moab, and more. And it's true that we're sharing radio stories, but we're also sharing into other platforms. Aspen Public Radio is a great example of that. As you can see here, we have a really important story done by a reporter at Aspen Public Radio, shared then in a local Spanish language newspaper. So our reach goes beyond our radio stations. And this is really important as we're all striving to better serve Spanish-speaking communities. But we're also increasingly collaborating and expanding our reach with digital stories. And this is an area in which we are continuing to grow. So, there's a story from KGNU, really important story, on e-bikes and their batteries, republished on Rocky Mountain PBS. And that radio story was broadcast throughout the Rocky Mountain Community Radio Coalition Network, but it's also being shared digitally as well. We're collaborating very often with digital news stories. We do often two ways with Chukby, Colorado. We've done them with Erica and other reporters. So here's an example of the really important series done by Chukby, Colorado. That's there on the left. And on the right, you can see that we have an audio version because I did a two-way interview with the reporter. The radio story is getting shared throughout our network, but also we then have a digital story that is also amplifying these stories too. And here, the Daily Yonder, a digital story coming out of the Four Corners, getting shared on our digital platforms, also getting shared throughout our entire region. So our individual capacity to excel, particularly in the digital spaces, it might be limited, but collectively, we have huge opportunities to harness the power of our collaboration to efficiently share digital content. And thanks to the Gill Foundation and CMP, Rimcore radio stations, we're now embarking on a new digital effort to help our stations strategize, maximize our resources and create efficiencies to help us reach into these digital spaces and connect to our communities in new ways. And through the grant, our radio stations, where we can see how well we're currently doing with our digital presentations on our websites, our podcasts, our apps, newsletters. There's so many ways we're in digital spaces. But now we're also poised to work together to capitalise on our existing digital reach and move forward. We're already successfully collaborating in many ways. So just imagine how much further we can go. So how do we expand those collaborations? Well, we can create intentional partnerships. Small rural communities that have maybe a rural newspaper, they could work with your local community radio station on programming and reporting. And that can look differently. We can have editors, we can have reporters coming in and talking on air about stories you're producing. And then we can embrace each other as collaborators and maybe work together on particular projects. Radio stations and newspapers can cross-promote each other's contents and events on their primary platforms, but also on their digital platforms as well. Radio stations can maybe access some of the reporting conducted by newspapers. Newspapers could then in turn access some of the audio clips or interviews to enhance their reports. News outlets should also be coordinating across our digital platforms, as we've seen, sharing content across websites, across our social media platforms, on our streaming platforms as well, all to reach a wider audience. And it's really important, particularly as small newsrooms are facing the challenges of the evolving media industry, and that we're seeing more and more of our audience showing up in these digital spaces. So news outlets and civic organisations could also work together to engage communities, identify issues facing their communities, bridging online but also offline connections as well, engaging our community members in this process. For example, co-hosting candidate forums as we're in election season, media literacy initiatives, co-sponsoring campaigns to educate community on how to critically consume and evaluate media. So working together, we can elevate all of our stories and better serve our communities. And as we are heading into our digital age, we're already there. It's not either or, it's both. We are our original platforms, our original media, but we're also digital, and collaborating together, we have an even greater reach. Thank you.